Good morning, everyone. Happy meteorological spring, March 1st, and March roaring in like a lion here. Josh's severe weather, I've got a lot to talk about just in the next couple of days. And trust me, I'm aware that there is a wintry pattern returning in March as we get our last season of winter. But I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm most concerned with quite a storm that's going to be moving into the southwest today and then tracking across the midsection of the country before the end of the week. And we've got a lot to talk about between strong winds, heavy flooding rains, severe weather, including maybe intense tornadoes, and heavy winter weather as well on the northern side of our storm. So, quite a bit to talk about here. Where I am in Raleigh, we've got pollen everywhere. My eyes are itchy. I've never seen it this early in the season, but there's good news in that it's going to be cooling off and getting wetter here the next few days, at least next week. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. Hate to say it, we're all ready for spring, but I'm actually looking forward to cooler weather. And I don't know about snow, but certainly cooler temperatures. So an intense storm is going to get cranking here in the next 24 hours. We're going to see kind of two waves from it. Number one, moving across the center part of the country today, and then moving into the northeast tonight into tomorrow. But the bigger part of it develops across North Texas here tomorrow in the afternoon and tracks northeastward along the Ohio River and up into the Great Lakes by Friday morning, and then redevelops off the coast Friday night into Saturday morning. Now, there's still, believe it or not, quite a bit of uncertainty in how things are going to play out, even in 48 hours from now. I would love to say I know exactly what's going to happen, but please just be a little bit patient with me and understand that things are going to be changing very fluidly here. Just a very dynamic setup here. What's going to happen is we've got an intense storm in the west that's going to move in. A strong upper low is going to form. The trough that's with it is actually going to swing around to negative tilt. That is going to pull a lot of warmth and moisture off the Gulf of Mexico into East Texas and the Arklatex here tomorrow evening. Out ahead of it, we do have a front that is going to trigger localized severe weather later today and tonight. So that's kind of wave one, and then we get hit again tomorrow evening across parts of the mid and deep south. And then as we head into Friday, we could have a renewed chance for some severe weather, including a few stronger tornadoes in Alabama and Georgia, and maybe even possibly sneaking into the Carolinas. And oh, by the way, we do have intense winds and some locally stronger storms that could produce hail and severe wind all the way up into Kentucky, maybe even sneaking into the Western Virginias later in the day, Friday into Friday evening. There's a cold part of the storm. The storm track has shifted left, right, left, right. It's really crazy to try and figure out, especially if you're in Chicago and St. Louis. But going off of the latest trends of the global models, it looks like the heavier snow doesn't really get cranking until early on Friday, and that would be near and just south of Chicago, and especially northern Indiana and southern Michigan. Areas that had an ice storm could have a major snowfall here on Friday. And then, especially across the interior of the Northeast and southern Ontario, we could see a widespread major snow event, with most of that coming in about a 24 to 36-hour time frame. Where the cold air is slow to leave, we could have some sleet building up in interior parts of Pennsylvania and maybe into the New York City and North Jersey area and possibly southern Connecticut. Looks like some snow going over to sleet and then eventually rain around New York City, primarily rain around Philly and Allentown. We could briefly see a little bit of snow and sleet on the front end, but not a major impact, I don't think. And then if you're south of Philly and you're in the Delmarva Mid-Atlantic region, you're not going to see anything but rain out of this, despite what a few days ago the models tricked us into thinking. And that's unfortunate, but that is just how things have rolled here this winter. Don't give up just yet. I know it's now March, but there is a colder weather pattern that will be sweeping south and eastward here around the 10th of March. And maybe the setup improves for something. Maybe. I'm not going to guarantee it that far out. I'm not going to show you GFS 15-day forecast either because they all suck at this point, but something that we'll be watching later on. Here is the watch and warning map from the National Weather Service. We do have a winter storm warning across the Dakotas into Minnesota with wave one moving through the upper Midwest. And we have a flash flood watch for a good chunk of the mid-south here. Dense fog advisory across central Florida south of I-4. And then our big storm in the west producing blizzard warnings continuing in the Sierra Nevada. Winter storm warnings surrounding that all the way into the mountains of southern Cal. Winter storm warnings across the mountains of the southwest. And advisories kind of in the plateau regions here near and south of Salt Lake City. We also have a high fire danger here with this cranking storm here in the southern high plains likely to produce intense wind and low humidity with it as things kind of jump past you there. So we've got a lot we'll talk about. This map is only going to get busier as we get to the next couple of days. Let's look at severe weather first. And late today into this evening, we do see kind of round one of what'll be a two-round system here of severe weather. Over 6 million people are in a slight risk for severe weather from near Dallas and Garland, Texas, on north and eastward through the Memphis area, the southern half of Arkansas, all the way into the lower Tennessee Valley, maybe sneaking into Nashville and Rome, Georgia later on this evening. And we could have some intense storms all the way up the Ohio River tonight, all the way close to Parkersburg, West Virginia. I would not be 100% shocked if this marginal risk area got drawn a little farther east towards the Triad and near Charlotte and towards Anderson, South Carolina, something I'll be watching for you guys here this evening. But most of the severe weather likely to be back here across the Mid-South, where we do have a risk for a tornado, a 5% chance from the Arklatex into the middle parts of Tennessee and especially northern Alabama and Mississippi. Also, locally strong winds possible here tonight in any of these areas. We could have a few supercell storms and possibly, as things get cranking here late this afternoon, some very large hail, which could cause some major problems in northeast Texas and sneaking into far southeast Oklahoma and all the way over to about the Memphis area later this evening. So definitely something to be concerned with today. Tomorrow, though, looks to be more of the headlining day for severe weather. That first wave moves out. We'll have leftover rain and thunderstorms in the morning in North Carolina. Not a big deal at that point. But now we have a moderate risk. And if you saw my video yesterday, this should not shock anybody. There's been talk about it. I don't know if we're going to go to high risk at this point. I think that may be a little bit far-fetched, but nonetheless, a moderate risk of severe weather does not need to be taken lightly. A lot of people tomorrow are going to be under the gun, especially in the evening, for intense storms and locally strong tornadoes and intense winds. And that area is centered on Texarkana and Longview and Tyler, Texas. Includes Shreveport as well. We've got almost 3 million people in that moderate risk, surrounded by over 10 million in the enhanced risk, which includes Fort Worth, Texas, down to all the way down into central Louisiana, the Piney Woods region, and then over to near Jackson and Memphis, and all the way up to about Searcy, Arkansas, and southeastern parts of Oklahoma. And then a slight risk surrounds that into parts of Middle Tennessee, down to Beaumont and Houston, Texas, and back to Austin. That slight risk area, by the way, is over 13 million folks, and a marginal risk over 20 million. So we've got about 55 million people at risk of some severe weather. Will everyone get a strong tornado? Unlikely, but definitely things can get initiated here in central Texas and the Big Sky country, and then get very busy as we get into the evening hours around Dallas, and then overnight as we get into the Ark-La-Miss region and Memphis, Tennessee. And then day three, right now, we have a huge area of a slight risk, 30 million people in that: Atlanta, Charlotte, Columbia, Montgomery, Birmingham, Nashville, Knoxville, all the way up into eastern Tennessee, getting into Lexington, Fayette. 30 million people in that slight risk. I do think we will likely see an upgrade coming, but I'm not sure how it's going to play out yet. I would say probably across Georgia and Alabama would be the most likely candidate for that to happen, but there's not a ton of certainty just yet on how everything's going to evolve. So I think they're going to hold off on that. But nonetheless, there will be the risk for some tornadoes and maybe locally strong winds in here. And I think 15% may end up being a little bit underdone. We could have a 30% here at some point, but we're not yet to that point. Now, let's take a look here at the short-range ensemble forecast showing the area of the most intense storms and the highest likelihood of a high tornado parameter. And you can see it's not super high this evening. This is 6 o'clock. But there's a 10 to 30% chance of maybe a significant tornado somewhere in this region this evening. That does wane a little bit, and then we wait on the trough to come in. And then tomorrow evening, right around 6 o'clock in Central Time, we start to see a very quick buildup of the threat for a few tornadoes. Maybe in Dallas before dark, but most likely south and east of Dallas, a 50 to 70% chance of intense tornadoes getting going. And that maximizes itself around 10 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock in East Texas, in much of western Louisiana, and in southern Arkansas. And that continues overnight farther east towards Monroe and Alexandria, Louisiana, up to about Pine Bluff, sneaking into the Mississippi Delta region. And then things kind of wane as we get later into the night. There'll still be a likelihood of severe weather, but less likely we see intense storms at that point, at least intense tornadoes. But then things start picking back up here around midday on Friday. and we've got a 30% chance of intense storms starting around Montgomery, Alabama, and spreading eastward towards Columbus, Georgia, Atlanta, Macon, Georgia, and then a 50% as we get to about Greensboro, Georgia, here around 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock Saturday evening. And then things will wane when they get into South Carolina. So there's more uncertainty once we get to the Carolinas. I think maybe a higher chance in Alabama and especially Georgia. I think Central Georgia is going to be the area I'm most concerned about at this point. And you can see why here. This is the 500 millibar chart, the GFS from weatherbell.com. You see the upper low moving into New Mexico tomorrow morning. Out ahead of it, there are some fast winds aloft, a disturbance here, but that flow is confluent, so not a widespread tornado event, but still low enough heights in here for intense storms to get going, and certainly a wet weather pattern as well. But as we get to tomorrow, we see the wind starting to intensify aloft as this upper low digs into West Texas. And this is 6 o'clock, and we see over 130 mile per hour winds in this jet streak that moves through central Texas. That's going to initiate a lot of storms here along our boundary near the Dallas-Fort Worth area, east of Dallas, east of Austin towards College Station. And things really get going in the evening. And this right here is a classic setup for intense tornadoes if the moisture and the instability is there in place. So it's not a slam dunk, but it definitely looks likely that the ceiling is very high for a major severe weather event tomorrow night. And a lot of that's going to be across this region here where this jet streak pumps out some intense lift, and we see an increasing amount of wind shear. And this is 3 in the morning Central Time, and at 500 millibars, we have winds of 150 freaking miles per hour. That is insane. So if things get going in here and there's bowing segments, we have a lot of wind shear and a lot of wind, not just directional wind shear, but unidirectional wind shear, that increase in wind and heights. And this right here is a classic setup. If somebody gets a squall line and there's some bowing in there, that somebody under the cover of the darkness tomorrow night is going to have an intense tornado, probably in Louisiana or southwest Arkansas. That's the area I'm most concerned with. Shreveport could definitely get battered hard here tomorrow night. And then you can see those strong winds continue, but we lose some instability late tomorrow night, and the upper low tracks north and eastward. The GFS has it going over the Boot Heel and south of Chicago, and that's where the cold air gets created to produce heavier snow somewhere on the north side of this. The NAM model has this upper low farther back to the west, and we see quite a bit of a difference in where the models kind of paint the picture here for the strongest lifting aloft. You can see the NAM takes it over the Ozarks, St. Louis, and right just to the south of Chicago, but the GFS is about 100 miles east. So there's still some disagreement in where things are going to end up here as we get into Friday morning. We do see our storm this morning bringing some snowfall to the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan later today. And then storms get going here over the parts of the deep south and northeast Texas, and especially southern Arkansas. We could initially see some intense wind and intense hail out of these storms around 5, 6 o'clock this evening. And then we see more supercells forming and some training setting up where we have heavy rainfall going over the same places. So not only severe weather, but flash flooding is a concern as we get through this evening. And intense storms carry all the way through the Huntsville, Alabama area, maybe towards Rome, Georgia here after midnight tonight to about 2 or 3 in the morning. And then things should start to wane a little bit. We'll see some more storms regenerating tomorrow morning. I don't think they'll be super severe at that point, but something we'll have to watch. But now you can see right around 2, 3 o'clock Central, we start to see storms initiating along our boundary in northern Texas and southern Arkansas, close to the Red River. Those move north and east. There could be some severe weather out of them, but the more intense storms get going around the Dallas area around 7 o'clock tomorrow night. And now we start to see an area of intense storms moving more quickly, and likely some intense tornadoes embedded within this line of storms later tomorrow evening and right on through tomorrow night, carrying into northern Louisiana. The HRRR and the NAM do show the upper low farther west and maybe a brief change over to some quickly wet snow. It's not going to be super cold on the ground, but it may be cold enough aloft to create its own instability and create a profile that allows precipitation to fall hard enough that it doesn't melt. So that's something I'll watch. I don't think we'll see a major accumulation anywhere in here, but someone in the southern plains into eastern Oklahoma could see a brief thumping of some wet snow. But I don't know if it's going to stick to the ground at that point. Farther east, we can see kind of a storm system over the upper Midwest here this afternoon. We could see out ahead of it a little bit of light to moderate snow across parts of New England and upstate New York. And then our area of storms moves eastward this evening and especially overnight tonight. Heavy rain moves into the Charlotte area and into Raleigh in time for your morning rush tomorrow morning. I don't think it'll be severe, but we look at a wet morning tomorrow in the mid-Atlantic region, and then things get cranking here tomorrow night across parts of the deep south. And I'm going to show you the NAM and give you kind of a better feel for some longer term timing here. So here's the area I'm most concerned with this afternoon and evening: Arkansas, Northeast Texas, Memphis, and then sneaking into Alabama, northern Mississippi overnight tonight. You see the heavy snow back across the Four Corners region, maybe some lighter snow developing here out of the NAM over the high plains. But here's our intense line of storms from near Tulsa right on down to about Longview and Tyler, and even getting down close to the Houston area later tomorrow evening and tomorrow night. This is 11 o'clock Central, or 10 o'clock Central, and you see an intense squall line bowing echoes here. A lot of rain, but also a lot of lightning and a lot of wind with it. And then that crosses quickly through western Louisiana late tomorrow evening and early on Friday morning, and then even carries into Mississippi, but it may weaken some at this point. Now, the NAM brings this rain over to heavy wet snow with temperatures just above freezing from Oklahoma on into Iowa. The other models are not showing that. The global models have this farther east, so I'm not sold on the NAM just yet. This could end up being grossly overdone, or it could end up happening farther east around St. Louis. But Chicagoland, you can see the rain snow line is right over you. So as this moves into Illinois, there's enough of a track to the north that brings the warmer air into Chicago, where the northern suburbs could get pelted with snow. The city on south could get rain. And again, it is very much up in the air as to what exactly is going to happen out of this. As we move into, let me move you guys eastward into the southeast, and you all can see, here's the first rain, batch of heavy rain moving through eastern PA, the mid-Atlantic and Carolinas. Tonight and tomorrow morning. Then we get a break, and then later tomorrow night, more showers and storms erupting over the Carolinas and Virginia. Here's our intense storm bringing severe weather into Kentucky and Tennessee around lunchtime on Friday. And in this area, if things get going, we could have some stronger storms and maybe an intense tornado or two. You can see the NAM pulls everything so far back to the north and west. It looks not quite as likely here on Friday afternoon, but the global models are farther south and east than the NAM. Here's the GFS. You can see there's certainly, it won't be widespread, but there's certainly the potential that any storm does get going could be intense in here. So that's just something I'm going to have to watch for you guys, and it will probably change. Here's the NAM significant tornado parameter. Again, it shows quite a bit this afternoon. That probably isn't going to happen, but as we get into tonight, Northeast Texas, southern Arkansas do have the threat for locally intense storms, and then that becomes a little more conditional as we get overnight tonight. But tomorrow, we see some off-the-chart numbers here around Northeast Texas. This includes Dallas County, and then this is 5 o'clock tomorrow, and then everything spreads east across East Texas. The parameters are there for intense tornadoes, and they'll be moving pretty quickly as we get into the overnight hours. I'm most concerned around this time frame. This is 10 o'clock Central around the Arklatex, including Shreveport, Bossier City. And then overnight, that carries into southern Arkansas all the way to about Pine Bluff. And then things do wane quickly here. We'll still have some locally strong winds, but I don't think we're going to have widespread strong tornadoes before daybreak in Mississippi and Tennessee. Now, as we get into Friday morning, things start ramping right back up in central and eastern Alabama right before lunchtime. And you can see those numbers continue climbing across southeastern Alabama early Friday afternoon. This will carry into an area where I think conditions are more prime for a few tornadoes, and some could be strong over Georgia. I think when we get into the Carolinas, though, Friday evening, that support does lower quite a bit. So I'm most concerned with places like Auburn and Montgomery eastward to about Columbus, Macon, maybe Atlanta, Greensboro, and perhaps all the way into the Augusta area tomorrow or Friday evening. All right, let's look at snow real quick. We do have some snow falling this morning and this afternoon over the northern central part of the country. Not a big deal, 5 to 6 inches. A bigger snow across the southwest. And then Friday night, you can see the GFS doesn't crank out any accumulation in here. It is much different looking than the convection allowing models, but we see potentially significant snow near and just south of Chicago, all the way to about St. Louis. And then really that ramps up Friday afternoon and then Friday night across Michigan and northern Indiana. I'm going to move you east so you all can see where this area of heavy snow will start setting up. We have lighter snow across New England tonight, tomorrow morning, and then heavier snow across the lower lakes here Friday afternoon and especially Friday night. And that spreads into New York State and interior New England, where most models here with a 10-to-1 ratio show a foot of snow from just north of Fort Wayne to about Detroit to Buffalo and Toronto, then eastward to Albany and all the way to Boston. We have the likelihood of at least 6 inches of snow and potentially as much as a foot of snow. Philly is going to kind of get gypped here. New York could see a little snow before we change to sleet and then over to rain later on Friday night, early Saturday morning. So a front end event and then primarily rain. The mountains aren't going to see much snow out of this as well. You've got to get pretty much north of I-80 to see any significant snow. The European, on the other hand, has a big snow back in Chicago, southeastern Iowa, and gets things going near Kansas City. A much different look than the GFS. You know, the GFS had all of this not happening, had things going farther east. So we still have time for this forecast to shift a bit. And then as you move east, you can see the European does not have heavy snow all the way back into central and southern parts of New England. It's got the higher amounts farther north around Watertown, New York, and over to Burlington, Vermont, which seems to kind of get missed with the heavy snow. So the Euro is about 100 miles north and northwest of the GFS. Still quite a bit of a difference here. I'll show you the NAM, but I don't buy it. When you get into Kansas, I mean, I don't think we're going to get 30 inches of snow. That really seems overdone. And the NAM generally leans in that direction, but you can see it's got the heavier snow across Iowa, northern Missouri, and across eastern Wisconsin and central parts of Michigan. All right, and you can see on the Chicago forecast here, the ensemble from the GFS has only an average snowfall of about an inch or two at O'Hare, with a high amount of maybe 4 inches, but there are some members of the ensemble spread here that show up to 2 feet of snow falling right on through Saturday morning. So things shoot up very quickly during the day on Friday and into Friday evening, but there's a huge spread. We may get rain at O'Hare or a brief amount of snow going over to rain, or we could see a thumping of very heavy snow. And I would love to see this agree 48 hours out, but it just doesn't. So if you're in Chicago, I feel for you, because this forecast is going to be one of the most challenging ones we've seen in quite some time. You're kind of on the line from perhaps getting a huge snowfall to just getting missed or getting a brief amount of snow. Strong winds are going to be an issue here on the plains today, and especially in the southwest. And then tomorrow we see winds intensifying at night over Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma, and then big intense winds across the Tennessee Valley and the Ohio Valley here Friday morning could cause widespread power outages regardless of whether or not we have severe weather. Those carry on into southeast Kentucky, eastern Tennessee, where we do have the threat for wind gusts of 70 to 80 miles per hour over the higher elevations. A major wind bag for us here. Even Indiana and Ohio are going to see strong winds Friday afternoon. West Virginia and western PA gusts to 50, and the Carolinas could see gusts of 40 to 55 miles per hour right on into Friday evening, right through Raleigh, Fayetteville, and then east towards Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Elizabeth City, and the Outer Banks especially, and even up the Jersey Shore here Friday night. So be prepared for some power outages in this region, not just due to severe weather, but due to strong synoptic wind gusts. Also, I'll show you, I showed you that. Total rainfall from the European. We see a big amount of rain down south today and tonight, and even more coming tomorrow. And some places could see the potential for 4 inches of rain, maybe even a few locally higher spots somewhere in here as well, and that could cause flash flooding. Farther east, we could see heavy rain across the mid-Atlantic region into the New York City area, maybe over an inch will fall. So that's something I'll be watching for you guys. A lot of this is going to be snow in here. If ratios remain below 10 to 1, we still could see a foot of snow. If they're above 10 to 1, we could see quite a bit more than that. And temperatures on the NAM, you can see the warm air is in place tonight, and then it builds. And we see intense heat building over South Texas, and then colder air spreads south and eastward but meets some resistance. So in Oklahoma, on one side of the low, we're in the 40s tomorrow. On the other side, we're going to be near 70 degrees tomorrow afternoon. And then you can see the front very quickly pushes through 98 in Laredo tomorrow afternoon. And then at night, we drop off into the 50s and even upper 40s. And here's our front carving eastward across the deep south on Friday morning. As we look farther east, you can see that front looks like it moves through Jackson, Mississippi, and Baton Rouge around 3 or 4 in the morning on Friday, and then across central Alabama in the morning hours. And it gets a lot cooler, but you can see as that front hits this part of the Gulf Coast, it does weaken some. And we see a tongue of warm air spreading up in Illinois, where we're in the upper 50s, maybe even near 60 in Evansville and Hopkinsville and Owensboro, Kentucky. Where we can see on Friday, the Carolinas and Virginia are going to be wedged in. This, again, does not look good for severe weather. It could be 37 in Boone and Jefferson, North Carolina, 41 in Roanoke around lunchtime on Friday. But you can see we're well into the 70s to near 80 across the Midlands and the CSRA here, and mid to upper 80s across parts of South Florida. So a very strong contrast here. This front may take until evening to get through places like Raleigh and Winston-Salem, but it'll briefly get warm before that cooler air follows. So it's very likely that Friday is a cooler day than Saturday behind the front in the Carolinas and Virginia. And you can see farther north that cold air is well in place as well. So I've gone 5 minutes longer than I really should have today, but I thank you all for your time today. I'm going to have another intense video for you tomorrow talking about severe weather, heavy snow, and flooding. If you could subscribe to my channel, you'll get community posts as well. I thank you for your time today. And real quick, I want to give all the credit to God through Jesus Christ, who allows me to do this every day. I've been called by God to present the weather to you all and to help save lives and get people prepared for major intense weather. And I thank God for doing that for me. And I know we all suffer. Romans 8:18 says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. God gave his son, Jesus Christ, who suffered for us. We are supposed to suffer. However, that suffering, that testimony that we have to give is much, much, much more rewarded with the fact that the glory of God is there for us eternally. And you have the option to accept that gift from God if you want to. He gives us all the gift. We don't all accept it at the same time. We may accept it on God's time, but I just pray that maybe that's a gift that you would be willing to accept. Happy to pray for you, and if you could pray for me as well for the success of this channel, and more importantly, for the safety of everybody in the path of this storm, I very much appreciate that. Thank you all so much for your time today. Gonna get some more coffee and buckle up. It's a big storm coming here early in March. Take care, everyone. God bless you.